Hello there, and welcome, Virtual Space Hero community, to our today's Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. I'm super excited because I think 2021 already started with tremendous topics and speakers. We ended 2020 with tremendous guests here on our live stage. And also today we are picking up on a topic that is super relevant, not only for virtual trainings, which is the context that we are going to discuss it in with, but also for many other areas. And last week we didn't have a virtual space here, LinkedIn Live, but we have been talking a lot about learning and development and how we can engage more our participants in our virtual trainings. And today I'm super happy because we are picking up on something that is tremendously relevant. We have storytelling. We all want to persuade our customers to buy our products. We want to persuade our learners to stay with us in the learning process and to pick up on the concept, the key concept that we want to teach them or that we are facilitating. And therefore, I'm happy to have with me one of the experts connecting from Belgium, and we're going to talk about how can we use storytelling and fairy tales in our virtual trainings. And I'm super happy, and I'm opening the virtual doors for Charles-Louis de Maere, connecting from Belgium, from the south of Leuven, correct?
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks a lot for your invitation. And indeed, this topic is very, very relevant, storytelling, be it in personal or in remote spaces, because I think if there's one thing that connects humans to one another, it's stories. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's fantastic because I think still, but let's hear your, of course, expert opinion. I think that maybe even in the virtual space, they might be more relevant because we're all struggling with keeping learners engaged, sort of connecting, bonding with them. And so I have the feeling that maybe stories for your virtual learning setting might be even more important. But what is your take on that?
So my take on that is biased, of course, because I've been using stories throughout 2020 for loads of virtual workshops where I've been like tremendous engagement and tremendous participation from people from all over the world, who didn't know each other at first. So this is like even more, and I think it's really key because it's what I said earlier. Stories connect one another because we get into stories through emotions. And if I tell you about the Three Little Pigs or Little Red Riding Hood, probably I hope you've heard of that. And so we can trigger some kind of Red Riding Hood with a wolf with a grandmother. So there are some themes behind that. But it's easier to talk about them through stories than to talk about the difficult themes directly. So it's a way of lowering the entry barrier.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But let me ask you, first of all, another question. How did you get into storytelling? Because you're also a facilitator. How did you discover the topic storytelling and fairy tales for yourself?
There's a story about that, actually.
I would be really sad if there wasn't a story, you know?
So actually, the thing is, I would say by chance. But I think, in a way, I've always been very interested in stories. I've read books and novels throughout my life. One thing that a few years ago, a very good friend of mine, Tobias Mayer, who's quite active into the Agile and Scrum space, organized an open space in London called the Scrum Exchange. And I'm always interested in open space because you never know what to expect there, but there can be lots of learning there. And I actually took the train from Belgium, and for the train, it's 3 hours or something. So I thought, hey, let's get something to read. And there's a bookshop, and I've got actually here. There's a bookshop close to the station where I found this, which is like the classic fairy tales from Hans Christian Andersen in a beautifully illustrated, like with with these old edition, and I just had to get that, and then I started reading in the train. The first story was a story about the emperor's new clothes. I don't know if you're familiar with that story. I could
No,
tell
no,
it
no, I'm not.
now. Ah, so this is also interesting because now we
Yes.
start to get the story in the story, and you know it's also I'm sidetracking a bit, but you know there are lots of great books like the Arabian Nights tell stories that are actually inside the story, and there's always a story inside the story, inside the story, and then at the end everything kind of plays out. So, The Emperor's New Clothes, in a few words, is about an emperor that puts all his money into clothing because he just loves beautiful clothes. Okay. Then suddenly two swindlers come and say, hey, we've got this magnificent cloth which has magical properties. It's invisible to those who are stupid or cannot do their job properly. So the emperor thinks, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know who in my court is stupid or cannot do their job properly so that I can have better people around me. Now, what happens, of course, is these swindlers don't have a magical cloth, but they just pretend to be working on it and receive loads of money for it. At some point, the emperor wants to know how it's going. So he says, I cannot go there because if I don't see anything, people will know that I'm stupid. So, of course, he sends his old minister there to look for the cloth. So what do you think he says, the minister?
No clue. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm like waiting for it.
So, of course, he sees nothing because there's no cloth. But he says, people cannot know that I'm stupid. I've been working for so long at the court. So he starts saying, oh, what a wonderful cloth. And it's beautiful and so on. And so like the rumor continues, like the cloth is beautiful and no one dares to say that they can't see anything. So comes the day where the emperor comes with his court to see the cloth because everyone has already seen it. And the emperor's like, okay, I can't see anything, but everybody sees it. So I need to play along. And then it gets up to the point where he gets to wear these clothes for the big annual procession that goes through the city. So he gets dressed, I would say, or undressed. And they all go out. The whole city cries like, oh, beautiful clothes for the emperor. Like everyone's like really about these
Following
clothes
it.
are wonderful, falling for it, until a little child says, hey, but why is that man naked? And at that point, two things. The city laughs, cries, haha, the emperor is naked, blah, blah, blah. And the emperor says, oh, I notice that I'm naked and the whole town knows it, but I cannot stop now. I need to continue this procession and carry on till the end. So as I sat
In order
reading
not to
that
lose the
story,
dignity.
totally, he could, yeah. And you know, I was reading that into the train and I thought, oh, I see loads of parallel things about my work and my life, whatever happens in organization and things where people don't dare saying the truth and so on. So I thought, like, hey, that could be a wonderful thing for the open space. Remember the bit, you know, this is like all the stories.
Yep.
And
Where we started, right?
where we started. And so the next morning starts the open space, and then everyone puts on a topic. And then I thought, hey, I've got something. I just called it the Emperor's New Clothes. But I didn't have something. So maybe I was like the swindlers. You know, I had a beautiful cloth that no one could see. And in the end, people voted for my session. I said, okay, you know, then let's see what happens. And in the end, it was great because we could talk about these difficult topics, about also like the things, the sunk cost fallacy. When are you going to stop investing into something when you see it's going nowhere? And what kind of mask do you carry when you go to work if you know things that are true but don't dare to say it, and so on? So it could bring, so it brought on topics that were very, very not surprised, very deep, that I didn't expect. So I thought, hey, there's something there. And then I continued working on it. And then last year, when the pandemic hit, I did a workshop like that, and like people joined, and it was fantastic. People not knowing each other, sharing about things that are so deep and so important. So that's how I got into that.
It's a fantastic story. And, you know, as I said, I had been disappointed if you wouldn't start with the story, honestly, when we have the storytelling topic today. Fantastic, Charles-Louis. Thanks. And, but let me ask you one question. So you were already mentioning there can be stories in stories, which is something interesting that I hope we're going to touch upon. But what is a story or what is a fairy tale? I remember I think I saw a TED talk about it where somebody was mentioning necessary elements. So what makes a good story? Is there other some guidelines that we need to consider when it comes to storytelling or the stories we choose?
Yeah, so what I'd say is I think it's key. So if I use a story for a workshop, okay, so the few things I do, if it's prepared like for a company or an organization, first we talk about, hey, what is it that we want to like address? Okay, because it's important to choose a story that is related to that. Okay, so I would say take a story where people can relate to it. And also, because I love taking existing stories because it's much easier than making one up. I mean, there's been people that have been writing stories for decades, for centuries. We can take from the Brothers Grimm's, we can take from the Arabian Nights, we can take from Anderson. There's loads of wisdom there. So it's like not necessarily we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because also another point which is critical is make sure that the story is short enough so that you can handle it. Because if I tell you, hey Barbara, let's have a workshop around Lord of the Rings, you know, how much time would it take me to read the story?
And the
so,
story
so
to choose from Lord of the Rings, right? There are so many in there.
yeah, yeah, totally. So yeah, I would say, you know, the not necessarily the brevity, but you know, have something which is short enough so that we can work on it. It's not just about sitting around a fire. Well, it is also about like sitting around a campfire, because in a way, in when we look at the past, knowledge was passed on around a campfire when we were like, you know, living in caves. This was the only moment where the whole tribe or whatever was gathered together and exchanging knowledge and exchanging stories that were passed on from generation to generation.
Absolutely. But when we think about, so you're saying like, let's pick up on stories that we might share, that we might know, or fairy tales. Of course, there's also a cultural element because I'm sure some of the stories they work in our Western or slash European context. Some of the stories would not work elsewhere. It's just there are other stories or fairy tales that are more common to share. But if you're saying that stories are sharing certain elements, would you say that there is always a good guy, a bad guy, like the princess and the one who abducts the princess, and then there is a savior, and then there is a challenge to overcome, or what would they are some design elements of those Anderson stories, for example?
Well, so you've got these that we can also find back in the hero's journey, you know, like the challenge and the wise men and so on. And you also have stories that don't follow those patterns. 2 weeks ago, I did a workshop around the snail and the rosebud, where at some point you've got this snail who's all into. I'm just going to paraphrase it. He's all into personal development, and the rosebud is all about, like, you know, lightheaded, just, you know, we've got the sun, we've got the rain, whatever's happening, and the snail is always into his own shell. And they notice that they can't communicate to one another because they're not talking the same thing. You know, the rosebud is all about like, hey, I've got a beautiful life, people are picking up roses to give to their girlfriends. You know, sometimes roses are also given as a at weddings and things like that. So there's all these tokens, and the snail is like, okay, you know, I'm just thinking this is not necessarily the life we need to lead, and so on. And actually, there was not even, I mean, there wasn't even a moral to the story. Actually, what happened after the story, it was more like, you know, people can complain about their own situation, but it doesn't mean that in new generation life will change or the world will change. So it's also about how can we deal with that. So some fairy tales have a good guy, a bad guy, and I think there's a nice quote by Neil Gaiman, who misquoted J.K. Chesterton, saying that fairy tales are more than true because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. So they are not true because they tell us that dragons exist, because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. And I find it an interesting one. And not all fairy tales use dragons and use monsters. Some are more just like a description, like taking a picture. And I liked it that you said that, we've got these different cultures. Some might work in European and Western cultures. Some might work in Eastern cultures. And I think if we take a step back and look at a deeper meaning, we notice that there is a shared understanding. Because in the workshop that I did online, we had people from India, we had people from Latin America, we had people from North America and Europe joined together around the same stories. And then we went into exploring, hey, what does that story mean to you and how does that relate? So, we talk a lot about inclusion, which is a choice. And I think it's an interesting step into this inclusion if we start sharing a story, and rather than saying, hey, this is a story for Western culture or from Eastern culture, it's like, hey, I wonder, how does this story resonate with you? What do you make of this?
That sounds interesting. So, for example, from a practical perspective, and I'm sure I'm seeing that we have already a few trainers and learning and development designers here in our audience. Also, at this point, a late welcome to all of you there. So, hello, Mitra, and hello, Nick and Thomas, joining our conversation already 15 minutes ago. They are all learning enthusiasts and virtual facilitators or facilitators. How would you then, from a very practical perspective, put in the story so that everybody is on the same page? Do you give them a one-pager, they read it, they connect in breakout rooms, they get a task, an analysis, or a reflection? How would you, from a very, very, very practical perspective, do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's easy to hear somebody say, just take fairy tales and then do a workshop with it. And I like it that Nick is there, because he's been also in some of these workshops, and it was always a great interesting time to have him there. The thing is, the easiest way to go there, first I would say run it in a space that you trust. I would say the first one, because you might say, hey, I'm not ready for this. Second, take a story, an existing one, a short one. You can take the Little Red Riding Hood, you can take whatever, but maybe look at something where you see a matching, because if you want to deal with, let's say that you notice that the people you're working with don't always tell the truth. Okay, then you might say, oh, Emperor's New Clothes might be a good fit, because it's about this clothing that is used to reveal whether others are stupid or not, but in the end nobody dares to say the truth because they are too scared of something. Okay, so take that story and then either read it yourself, because if you're the facilitator, maybe you might think it's better for the group if I read it, or you can organize a reading session. These are different options depending on the group. Okay, and then once you've got that, maybe before you read the session, when you prepare for your workshop, prepare some questions. Like a question for the Emperor's New Clothes would be like, okay, which person do you feel the most closest to? You think you're more like the Emperor? Do you think you are the little child who's always calling out the truth? Do you feel like the old minister that was entrusted by the Emperor, but in the end got tricked into a situation where he couldn't escape? So that could already be a first start. Or the other one is like, okay, maybe take the story. So you read the story, and then you can ask the group, find the moment. You talked about this this challenge about the thing that the hero goes through, and find the moment in the story which is the tipping point. And what could be another option for this tipping point, or for handling that situation instead of doing what the group did? I don't know if that resonates with you. So there is this, and then there's also like you can. Oh, Barbara, you're gone. So I'm going to continue. So basically, we've got the option of either asking some questions, or you can also ask them to come up with another outcome for that tipping point. And I don't know, maybe if you've got some questions or some questions, you can use the comments. So I'm curious, did some of you already try using storytelling in your workshops? I'd love to hear your or to read your comments about that. So basically, I would say that the most important thing, I think Barbara's gone, so I'm going to continue anyway. So feel free to comment and so that I can pick up on that. The most important bit when you use storytelling in your workshops is find something where people can relate to, because it's critical. If you tell a story that doesn't talk to or where no one can relate to, then it's not going to work. So if you have a story where people can relate to, then you can already start saying, hey, once we have that, oh, you're back.
Sorry,
Hey.
I ran out of coffee, people. I needed to go. It was a little bit unfriendly not to say goodbye, but here I'm back again.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So actually, I said that the important bit is to either find this tipping point, also to say, hey, what would be another option there? Okay.
Fantastic. That's a very good point. So, and how would you, for example, if you have such an activity, you're debriefing it afterwards. So people go, for example, into breakout rooms, I assume, or they work on a reflection activity by themselves. And then you pick that up in a debriefing session and relate it to the context. Just to summarize, so that I understood correctly.
Yeah, that's totally this. Yes. And then I've got I see a great question here in the chat by Ethan. I'm not sure whether I pronounce the name right. So have I had the experience of people going, oh no, not another story, and how have you dealt with this? Great question. And for the moment, I haven't. So I'm knock on wood. People come back, and I organize these workshops regularly online, and I think people either come back or they don't come back, but I work with the people who come back, so, and they know it's a storytelling workshop. So, but
I also must say, I'm really curious, what is your experience also out there? There are many people now watching from different channels. So let us know what is your experience on how people react to stories being used in a learning context. Because honestly, I have so far never been in a workshop or training where somebody used a fairy tale and sort of connected it properly to one of the challenges that we are discussing in the training. So honestly, I think for me, at least personally, it is something pretty innovative, I would say. Yeah. But let us know your comments also as well there. Ethna is just saying, Ethna means that you have lovely clients.
I love it. Yeah, thank you indeed. And maybe I'm too bold or too courageous to worry about this. Oh no, not another story. Because what I think, and it's just me thinking that out loud, is what I think is maybe people are curious about what will be the next story that I'm going to bring. It's about this curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Charles-Louis, you are doing storytelling workshops. So the next question is, how can we learn to tell stories and use fairy tales? So of course, there is one thing at this point that all of you should be doing. You should be connecting with Charles-Louis. He is tagged in this LinkedIn Live post, and follow him. And of course, sign up also for his workshop on fairy tales or storytelling. But if you just give us some ideas on what are you doing with people in your storytelling workshops. What would that be? Some elements or some ideas?
Yeah, well, I would like to tie to your previous question about where you said that finding people to finding ways to use fairy tales successfully in workshops. Huh?
Mhm,
So what do I do? And it's a great question because I think the key thing really, and it goes back to your question, is if the story doesn't share some elements with the topic to address, then there's no point. It's
mhm,
not using stories because using stories is cool, because otherwise people might lose their time. And then I might understand people like Ithne was saying, like, oh no, not another story. Because and I think maybe this is the symptom of, if we use things just because they look cool, then we miss the point.
mhm, mhm,
So now for some practical tips and tricks, really the first thing is, if you want to try that, as I said earlier, take a group of people that you trust. Don't do it for 80 people for the first time. I mean, except if you're feeling bold and courageous, then I did it 2 years ago just by putting it on an open space, with people I didn't know. But so I would say just do it with a small group and have a plan. Okay, we want to address this situation. Okay, great. Well, maybe, if you do regular retrospectives and want to see how you can improve the way of working, you can say, okay, there's something we need to tackle here. We feel like, I'm going to take again the Emperor's New Clothes example because I told the story earlier on. So we need to talk about trust, or we need to talk about how we say things to one another. Or we need to talk about, like, this project has been going on for years and years and years, has never delivered. When are we going to pull the plug? Okay, great. So then I can see some similarities, and then I use that story. I
mhm,
also said
mhm.
that it is by reading the story in the train on my way to London and finding some similarities in my work life that I said, hey, there might be something to do there.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
if there's one advice I can tell you, stop reading business books, read fairy tales.
I
and,
was thinking about the same.
but yeah, because you can read them for your enjoyment, and you should read them for your enjoyment, and then reflect on them. Because today I got an email from somebody who went into my workshop 2 weeks ago about the snail and the rosebud, and who said the story is still going on with me. I
Mm,
still
mm,
reflect on that story that happened there. So
mm. You know what I'm just thinking? I think it must be fantastic now for all of us because reading stories, for example, for those of you who have children, comes to a totally different dimension now because those of us who are in the learning and development sphere or space and we have children or we're reading to anybody else or we're just reading for our own joy from now onwards fairy tales, it's just we see them from a totally different angle or there's a totally different light on the stories that we might be reading or the fairy tales. I really love that. But shall we, let me pick up what Nick is putting there in the chat window. So, oh, it's covering
wow.
us. But Nick, I'm giving you all the
Whoa.
space now here. So Nick is saying, I've been lucky to share with many people as Charles-Louis says, many great facilitations that are inclusive and engaging. I've used storytelling myself to increase openness and understanding within the group. The format I used was to have an open question, then start the story, find a point to break the story, ask a question that is simple, but likely to bring diverse answers. Also to use questions that put people into viewing the story from a different perspective
Yeah,
other than their own. Fantastic, Nick.
wonderful.
Uh,
Yeah.
great comment, very good point. And particularly what I liked here is as well, I think very often we as trainers and facilitators, we ask questions that sometimes are so complex and not easy enough to directly go to the point with our learners. So I really love that and the different perspectives as well.
Well, I
Fantastic.
like that as well, especially this simplicity goes back to the stories. As we said earlier, stories allow us to talk about complex matters using a simple structure that
Mm-hmm.
everyone understands. And the thing, once we start using complex words, we all have our different understanding of it. But if we put it in a narrative, we can it adds a layer of understanding.
Absolutely. Let
And
us know if you have, because we have a lot of more comments that I'm going to drag in. But let us also know what stories did you use, maybe, and to what context did you connect them? Because I think now with your explanations, Charles-Louis, it's interesting to see. Okay, the Emperor's Clothes. It's not only about telling the truth, but it's about trust. It can be about communication. It can be about hierarchies. So there are so many ideas that are popping up now that let us know as well what stories you are using and what topics you're connecting them. That would be really fantastic. And I see there, look at that. Martina is just saying that she had a trainer who used the story that you mentioned before with the Emperor. Unfortunately, she cannot remember the context, but okay, that would be amazing.
yeah, and it is, I can totally understand that. And this is something that we need to be careful of when using stories. And it ties back to the thing, if it's not related, or maybe if it's further related, if people remember the story but not the context, then maybe there's some tweaking to do there.
What went wrong? What could be something that went wrong? Because the story and the context should have such an impact that, of course, you don't forget that. What
So,
do you think is one of the main problems or the main mistakes that facilitators are doing when they use storytelling?
so I'm going to tell you a story, Barbara, and I will tell you already what the learning points are. This is a
Good.
great mistake.
Ah,
If I
okay.
tell you,
I was like, good.
I got you there, right? So, if I tell you the story, and then I say, okay, and the key learning points are on my next slides, what's the point?
Yeah, very good.
So I think, and I don't know whether that's what happened with Martina, but it's really something. I like also what Nick was saying. If we invite others to put their input and to put their perspectives and work from that, if we work from different perspectives, then it's very powerful. There was also a story about the three languages. It's a story from Grimm. The Brothers Grimm. I don't know which one wrote it, but anyway, it's about a count in Switzerland that has a son, and his son is like not learning anything, very stupid, according to the father. So the father sends him off to a friend in order to learn something. When he comes back, he said, "Father." So no, the father says, "What have you learned?" "I learned the language of the dogs." "You stupid son, go away for another year at another friend." "What have you learned now?" "Oh, I've learned the language of the frogs." "You will amount to nothing. I will send you away once more, but if you don't learn anything, you will not be my son." So he goes away, he comes back. "What have you learned?" "The language of the birds." Okay, now the son is thrown away. I mean, okay, you just live your life. You're not my son anymore. Of course, it's a fairy tale, so there needs to be a reason behind that. So the son goes away, and then he arrives his first night into a village where he asks for somewhere to sleep, and they tell me, "Oh, you can go to that tower, but that tower is cursed." Each night people who sleep there, usually next morning they are like devoured by hounds. He just goes to sleep there, and then the next morning he's still awake, and he said, "Oh yeah, there were indeed dogs, but they were crying because there was a treasure hidden and no one was caring, and blah blah blah. So I could calm them, and by the way, there's a treasure." Okay, cool. So then he continues off his way, and then he hears the frogs crying because apparently the Pope has died. "Oh, goodness you, the Pope has died." Okay, so he continued, and even they said that there would be somebody replacing him. And then he arrives at Rome, and two doves land on his shoulder, which means that because the new Pope hadn't been chosen, so of course everyone says, "Oh, that's the new Pope." And he says, "Yeah, I'd love that, but the thing is, I can't say the mass. I don't know the words about the mass." But the doves say, "Don't worry, we'll tell you." So basically, the way I use that story is about how do we measure the impact of learning? What is useful learning?
Yeah. Very, 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 very good story. I love that one. Thank you so much. And I'm still laughing about my reaction from the when you said like, I'm telling you a story, I'm telling you the three learnings. I'm like, yes, Barbara, Miss Super Pragmatic, Effectiveness. Good
Yeah.
point. And you know what I was thinking about? And I'm always quoting Joshua because it's not his quote, Joshua Davis, but he introduced me to the quote, the one who does the talking does the learning. And it's a quote from somebody else, which I really love because that's exactly what you were saying. If we introduce the learnings by ourselves and don't have the learners to discover the learnings, that's one of the major sort of problems or major misconceptions in learning design.
And I would even like to add something to that. I think if we, as facilitators or learning designers, don't have that kind of curiosity, because if we think we know what's going to happen, then we also miss the mark.
Mm-hmm.
So I learn a lot in all these sessions because sometimes I think, oh, it's going to go that way. So I prepare the story, I ask my question, and suddenly, whoop, it goes this way. I'm like, oh, let's go with it.
Fantastic. Surprise, surprise. Let's have a look there. So Soledad is sharing that her experience in intercultural training is that you can make attendees to extract a learning concept from any well-told story, either a fairy tale or from your own experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks a lot for sharing.
Yeah, it's wonderful, Soledad, and it aligns a lot with what I was talking earlier about these workshops that I did with people from all around the world sharing around one story. That was, I call these workshops around the world in less than 80 days because there was a series of workshops, and the idea was to take a story from one culture each time, and then to see what we could get from that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you maybe one critical question, because I think many stories, and I still have the feeling that stories needs to be properly selected and very carefully selected, because if I look at some of the stories, and we had a lot of discussions with my sister, for example, on, I'm not sure if it was Anderson or Grimm stories, about the stereotypes those stories also convey. So, of course, in our setting, because we are talking about an adult learning setting, we can also reflect a lot on stereotypes, misconceptions, and all those ageism, or, well, whatever kind of stereotypes that are conveyed in the stories. But would you think that there are more aspects to consider when we select a story, to be careful about how and what story we select?
It's a wonderful question, Barbara. I love it, because I think even if I'm careful in selecting my story, I could go wrong. And I think it's okay as long as we have that conversation. If I say like, oh, don't worry, it's blah, 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 and we don't talk about it, then I'm in the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we use that as an opportunity to talk about this, then great. Because stories have been written in certain historical context, which is not like 2021 today. So there were some other truths back in the day. Yeah, like we all know how Galileo suffered when he was saying like the Earth is not the center of the universe, guys. He was not saying guys, but he was like, and now I would not say guys, I would say folks, and
Yeah.
it's all these things. If we take the story as it has been written, or if we rewrite it, okay, but let's have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, all of you folks out there, one question. What was your favorite fairy tale? Let's see. Streaming is always a few seconds late, so let's see what comes in, because I would love to know about your favorite fairy tale when you were a child or as an adult, or maybe also the one that you like to tell to your children or use in training. So give us some context there that we also know you a little bit better. We're coming into the last 1 or 2 minutes of this today's virtual space here, linked in live. Yeah, time flies. stories. It's amazing. So let me ask you maybe a very open question here. What would be your suggestion for those who want to try out storytelling? So you already said, like, pick a story, think about the context, connect it properly, test it with a smaller group, maybe in a first instance. I see that you are working with a lot of visuals back there. Would you say that for storytelling you need to be a good drawer as you are, or a good painter? Do you need to have good visuals?
I'm not sure. However, one can use props. Because I
Objects.
could,
So how can we use objects in
yeah,
our trainings?
totally. If I tell the story of a train, I could, like, at some point use sound, or I could, if I have a picture book, I could maybe show the drawings. It's not because we're behind our screen that we need to stay seated. Maybe we need to stand up, and then say some things about whatever's happening. Or, if I wanted to talk about the story about a beheaded king, I could do this, But we can use the whole space that we have here, be attached to our screen and like live it out, I once tried something. Ultimately it didn't play out the way I did. It was a story by Terry Pratchett about a computer and Father Christmas. FTB, if you want to know about it. So that's the name of the story. But what I had in mind was to type in whatever the computer was saying on the terminal so that participants would see it. But then I noticed my typing isn't as fast as my speaking. So in the end, I just switched. So I think this is also one great tip, is if you see something isn't working, and this is something that I would say to any facilitator or any learning professional, is like, be open with it. Say, okay, I was going to try this. I see that it doesn't work. And I switch gears. I do something else.
Fantastic. What I love a lot is this last tip about props and how to use objects in your virtual training. And I think I'm also going to share later on in the comment section here, because I wrote a blog article about that, because I also have the feeling that the moment we moved to the virtual space, we left out a little bit all those things that we were using in a normal training in presence context. And I think that's really a fantastic idea. And I think the ideas that you gave us with the train noise, and of course the beheaded king as well, are just fantastic. So we see here, and people out there, we are not getting you out of this LinkedIn Live if you don't share your stories with us. And I'm just picking one of Ethna there now. So the pirate queen from Grain Oil, which is very Irish. So Ethna, thanks a lot for sharing. We are going to Google that and have a check on that. But also you, Soledad, Francis, and Martina, those who participated in the conversation, Nick and Thomas, share with us later on. And we really want to have that, your personal favorite stories. So thanks a lot, Ethna, that you did the first step here. And thanks a lot, Charles-Louis. It was fantastic having you with us, sharing with us all your experience and the ideas on storytelling and using fairy tales. I just love them, and I'm really thankful that you accepted my invitation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Barbara. It was really a pleasure here sharing the stage with you, and really loved also all the tips that I saw coming in the comments. And I'm going to look at this pirate queen story. Thank you so much for all these inspired LinkedIn Lives. It's always a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And you know that I prepared sort of a small cocktail backstage, so I'm joining you in a bit. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So thank you very much to everybody out there for being with us. Soledad, we got your gracias, but we also need your favorite stories. So come on, still share with us your favorite story. Thanks so much for being with us. And I also see Nick is leaving another comment that is fantastic. Also, we are going to tackle them, and we're going to respond to you written afterwards. Thank you very much for joining us. You know that next week we're also going live, Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live, on Thursday, and we're going to a slightly different level. We were looking at learning and development, training and facilitators this week. Next week, we're going to explore with Helene Beidjani the importance and aspects of the organizational learning culture. So I'm very, very much looking forward to discussing with her a different level on about learning and how it influences our organizational performance. And you know that on virtualspacehero.com, you can already find all the LinkedIn Lives scheduled up to June. And I also have another guest, and we're talking about storytelling for managers. So Rens Green is going to join me in June, I think it is, and we're going to tackle storytelling from a managerial perspective there. And with that, I'm really happy to have all of you out there with your comments and for following us, for your support. Thank you very much. Go also to our YouTube channel and subscribe. You can watch all the LinkedIn Lives there as well. So if you go to YouTube and you search for Virtual Space Hero, there is a playlist only with these LinkedIn Lives. Go there, have a check, and we're always looking forward to your feedback. So thanks a lot, and I'm wishing you a beautiful evening, afternoon, or morning. Bye.